Hello, and welcome to the final day of our first statewide organizational change management conference. This is the statewide OCMCOP Community of Practice and the amazing team at Results Washington who put this together for you. I'm Cheryl D'Angelo Gary, and I have the incredible privilege of leading the organizational change management community of practice. So if you have any questions about that or want to join, send me an email at change@lni.wa.gov. I am super excited to kick off this last day with a very talented panel who's sharing one of their areas of expertise, communication, which is, of course, a critical component of change. So we'll have chat on throughout this presentation, so please use it to share your thoughts, your reactions, whatever you want to share. If you have questions for the presenters, I'm going to ask you to use the Q&A instead, because that helps keep your question from getting swept away when chat takes off. So today we're going to be hearing from three amazing individuals. Jesse Walker is a very talented change manager at Labor and Industries with over 18 years of experience in change and project management. Jesse has one of the most strategic minds I have ever worked with, and it's always a pleasure to hear her speak. Tiffany Loescher is a communications manager with many years of experience. I have had the pleasure of working with Tiffany for a couple of years now, and I know her to be a very strategic communicator who is truly interested in helping others and herself be their best. And Samantha Trotter is one of the expert contractors that L&I brings in on large projects. Samantha's expertise includes organizational development and change management. And I have learned that she brings tremendous energy and expertise to everything she's involved in. So I am really looking forward to learning from this group today. Without further ado, Samantha, Tiffany, Jesse, take it away.
Awesome. Cheryl, thank you so much for the kind introduction. So, hey, everybody, it is so great to be with you on this Thursday morning. And I will speak for myself, Jesse, and Tiffany when we say we were really thrilled to be asked to be part of this first conference for the OCM community of practice. So this presentation is kind of a public and private partnership of sorts. We have two really incredible folks from L&I that you're going to meet in just a moment. And then you have me from Librum, which is a Pacific Northwest consulting firm. And I'm partnered with L&I on a current change initiative. So today we're going to dig into communications. So next slide, and we'll go over what we're going to cover. Thank you. All right, so here's what we're sharing today. So you probably want to know, who are these people, right? We'll do welcome and introductions. We will review the outcomes for this session. So what is it that we're trying to help you learn, and what do we want to offer you in this time together this morning? Jesse's going to cover the really crucial component of building partnerships in any change initiative. And then Tiffany's going to give us her communications lens on the comms plan, and then also touch on a lot of that relationship piece. So how does OCM and communications work effectively together to really accomplish the things that we want to get done? We're going to share some tools with you. So we want to offer further information and things that you can take and use on your current change initiatives or those future things coming up. And then we will have Q&A. And like Cheryl mentioned, please, if you have questions, pop them into the Q&A section. Just use that Q&A button, put them in there. We'll be monitoring that. And we really are going to pause throughout this dialogue today to get your feedback, your questions, and just anything that's really coming up for you as we share this information. All right, next slide. Pain points. So communication. I have a quote that is laminated and above my desk that says, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." It was attributed to George Bernard Shaw. I'm not sure if that's accurate because of the internet, but we'll figure that out later. So we surveyed change management and project management folks about their biggest issues that they typically run into on change initiatives. And these are the themes that we heard. So the internal comms processes are burdensome. So you might have a partner internally, but the process takes longer perhaps, or seems to take longer than what you want to engage with to get your stuff done, your comms drafted, developed, out the door on a change initiative. Another theme is the lack of the internal comms resource to begin with. So I know I personally have been on a lot of change projects where they're like, you're it. We have an internal comms team. They're plenty busy. When it comes to this project, you're doing all of the comms alone. Another theme, key communicators might be hesitant to draft and deliver the communication. So maybe you're running into a situation where you have a sponsor or a project lead, someone with positional authority who really needs to be sharing information about the change, and they're kind of hesitant to do so. So we can run into that. Unclear roles and responsibilities. Jesse's going to dig into that a little bit. A lot of times, not only is it kind of unclear within the organization being impacted by the change what people's roles and responsibilities are, but within the project team, it can be murky. And then the last one, I don't know if you all have heard this. What's OCM? I've heard that a lot. I've been a practitioner for years and years, and I've either had people boil it down to that's just comms and training, or it's just making people feel good, or XYZ, right? Fill in the blank. They might not have a holistic understanding of what organizational change management is to begin with. And so that makes it harder to partner and kind of set expectations for how comms are going to go. Okay, Kristen, I see your comment. What is OCM exactly? I feel you. I feel you. All right, next slide. So let's meet. And I will say, so in the chat, we have a few folks who said yes to all those. Were there any that we missed? Any pain points? Or maybe common themes that you hear or experiences you have around trying to do effective communicating in times of change? Go ahead and throw that into the chat if you have any. Those that want it in writing, yes. Thank you, Adrienne. Other people giving me their understanding or interpretation of OCM, yep. Leaders who won't clarify their message because they don't know yet, yep. Eli, that's a beautiful one. I've run into a lot of people who are like, if I only had all the information possible under the sun, that's when I'm going to offer up communications, right? They feel like they have to have the full picture, when often the most valuable and effective communication is saying what we don't know yet. Explaining the what and leaving out the why. Rachel, I don't know how many projects I've been on. I might be preaching to the choir here, but sometimes I'm contracted to provide OCM on a project that's been underway for a while. And when I introduce myself and I start meeting people, they're like, we still don't know why we're doing this. Like, we have no larger scale why. Context. Lack of context, Glenn. We're thinking similarly. Christina, communication that others think will get passed on but won't. Yep. Beautiful. Thank you. Yep, employees saying there was no communication, but oftentimes they choose not to read it. Yep. Okay, so we can all agree there's room for improvement, right? Anytime a group of humans get together and try and do something probably fantastic in this change, try and implement something, communications is a huge, crucial piece of that. So, quick introduction to who we are. And next slide, thanks. All right, so I'm Samantha Trotter. So I'm the Organizational Development Director at Libram. So we're a smaller consulting firm here in the Pacific Northwest. We primarily support Washington, Idaho, Oregon with project management, change management, and organizational development. So a little bit of my background, I have over a decade of state service. So I was a state employee for a number of years and then shifted to the private sector about 5 years ago. My background is in program development, employee development, leadership development, change management, OD, the org development piece. and then executive coaching. And communications, I'm real finicky about communications, y'all. I think it can really create a narrative around a change that's healthy or really off-putting. So it's something that I think is incredibly important to pay a lot of attention to. I've supported change management efforts at Department of Licensing, DCYF, Ecology, a few of the divisions and departments within DSHS, kind of all over the place. Also City of Boise in Idaho. And I am really, really excited to be here with you. And I'm going to hand it over to Jessie to introduce herself.
Thanks, Samantha. Hi, everyone. So as Cheryl said, I'm an organizational change manager with Labor and Industries. I've been in state government for almost 20 years now. I'm a certified ProSci practitioner, as well as a certified change management professional with the Association of Change Management Professionals. I've been doing change management here at Labor and Industries, and prior to that, I was at the Department of Social and Health Services and the Administrative Office of the Courts, where I spent a lot of time doing formal and informal change management, as well as I have a strong background in project management and adult learning. And I could just echo everything Samantha said. Communications is in everything that we do. Change is in everything that we do. So I've spent a ton of time talking to people. It's probably communications is where I put a majority of my effort in just about everything that I do. So I'm excited to be here today, and I look forward to talking to you. Tiffany.
Thanks, Jessie. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tiffany Loescher, the Communications Manager for the Insurance Services Division at Labor and Industries. My team provides communication support for Washington's workers' compensation system. And I've been with L&I for more than 8 years. I have worked in communications both in state government and the private sector for more than 20 years. Most of my experience in state government has been at L&I, the Department of Health, and also the Healthcare Authority. Back in the days when the Healthcare Authority was quite small, actually. There were about 200 people there. So things have changed for them for sure over time. And over the years, I've had quite a few opportunities to collaborate with change managers. So it's really great to be with all of you today. I feel like we're in good company. Just seeing the chat and some of the pain points even you brought up. I think if you've worked in or with communications and change management over the years, you're going to be familiar with those kinds of challenges. And so I look forward to just being with you and talking through these things today. Samantha, I think I'm turning it back to you.
Yes. And we will go ahead and shift to the next slide and give you an overview of what we want to get done today. So we have a couple of outcomes. Our first goal is to build a better understanding of the interplay of roles on a change effort. So we cannot emphasize enough the relationship piece, right? Effective partnerships, the way they are structured, the way that we approach people, and really kind of have a nuanced way of responding to their needs and our needs, and balancing those two is incredibly important. So Jessie's going to dig into that with us. The second goal is to offer useful advice and resources for real world application. So this is one of the things I'm really excited to have Tiffany here. I would like her to follow me on all my projects, please, because I typically don't have someone in the comms office who has the capacity, the ability to engage with me when I'm doing organizational change management. So we're going to hear from her on really practically, like, what can that relationship look like and what tools can you use to make it clearer and more consistent? We have a caveat sticky on the slide. So in the corner, it says we're presenting on what's ideal. Reality can look different. So one thing that we know, right, when we're applying change management, no two projects are going to be similar in terms of the personalities you're working with, your resourcing, the timeline that you are operating under, the culture of the organization, the culture of the project team. I think that's what makes me marvel at all of you OCM practitioners, is you have the ability to really flex and operate within different environments and apply this kind of science and art of change management in really different contexts. So please keep in mind, what we offer is not This is the rigid toolkit that you use every time in every instance. It's food for thought, right? So take what works for you and then let go of the rest. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Jessie.
Thanks, Samantha. So I'm going to kick us off today talking about roles and partnerships and communications from a change management perspective. And I'm going to share how I like to approach the work and the things that I think about. And just like that caveat that Samantha just shared with you, there's a lot of spaces that I like to explore as I join an effort, but we're not always in the position to do this. So perhaps we've started in the middle of something or we're in a time crunch. So if that's the case, we do the best that we can. But if the pain points that we talked about earlier start to come up for us, there's a good chance they're happening because there isn't clarity about what I'm going to share with you in the next few slides. So just remember, it's never too late to have these conversations. So when I think about the roles on a change effort, these are the ones that I think of. And as I talk through them, I'd love it if you'd please put your thoughts in the chat about roles that you interact with and how you might interact with them. So the first one's the project manager, and then there's your sponsor, your subject matter experts, perhaps your external partners. Some of us work with unions, consultants, other agencies, communities. So that could be volunteers, affinity groups, organizations, or associations. Of course, a lot of us work with the public too. And then there's your communications partner, if you're so lucky to have one on your effort, and your internal partners, such as your business analysts, maybe your technology teams or your facility teams. And I found that really no matter what, all of these individuals and groups and teams require some type of communication throughout a change. And they also play a role in the communications processes. Sometimes they are the messenger, sometimes they help develop messages, provide content, review, or share feedback. And there's just kind of a million possibilities that could happen with all these people involved on your team. And the reason that this is important, like Samantha said, just like the scope and size of change is always different, so goes the communication needs, so goes the purpose that drives your partnerships and what those partnerships look like. So I like to revisit these roles when I get started, understand what their communication needs are, how they might be my partners before I take any action. Next slide, please. So in terms of possibilities, they continue to grow. And when we're talking about project communication, there's two distinctions in our minds. Today, we're talking about communication within the project team. So that's the people you're communicating with in order to accomplish the work. And then communicating from the project outwards. And that's the people you're trying to reach as part of the objectives and goals of the project. And again, these two distinctions make a difference in how you partner with those roles on the previous slide and the shape of your role in communications in the process and each of the steps. So now let's talk about what it looks like to build partnerships and even more variables to consider. On the next slide, please. So when you're building partnerships, generally there's two things to take into consideration right away. And I like to set up my mindset for the road ahead. So the first one is to acknowledge that there's a change taking place already, most likely. And that's that you're going from independent work or working independently of each other to collaborating together. And oftentimes we've maybe been assigned to something, maybe we've chosen to take part in some work, or we may not have had a choice and kind of been voluntold. And so it's important to think about what all mindsets folks might be approaching the work with in terms of this partnership so that I can best connect with them. And the second thing I remind myself of is this Tuckman group development model that's on the screen here, and that partnerships take time to develop, even if it's a partnership of two. And I need to remind myself that it's a process, that we start kind of forming, there's the storming stage, the norming, and so on, that things look and feel maybe bumpy or crunchy when you start, but eventually they smooth out if you keep at it. So from here on out, I'm going to focus on the partnership with your communications partner. If you're so lucky to have one, I know we don't always get that opportunity on projects. And if you don't have one, I encourage you to replace this partnership person with someone that you might be working with now, or even your project manager, because oftentimes the project manager is likely to assume some of the shared responsibilities of communications. Next slide, please. So for me, I begin thinking about the big picture and overall strategy, and I really like to work intentionally with my communications partner to discuss this. And so I open the door with them by reaching out and saying, hey, we haven't worked together before, or here we are again, but the change is different. I'd like to talk about our roles. I think they may have some overlap, and I'm hoping we can get us off on the right foot. And generally folks are like, yes, I'd love to talk to you. Let's get to it. And as I talk about my strategy here, I'd love it if you'd put in the chat how you might approach your initial conversations with your partners and what you might include in your strategy as well. So the first thing for me is, what do we need to know about each other in order to work well together? And there's generally so much that I can learn about a partner in order to work well with them. And so I like to think about various personality styles. What about leadership styles? Everyone has a different way of leading, communicating, engagement, or different ways that people like to approach conflict or resolution. I like to also think about how people prefer to receive information. So their learning preferences, how do they sift through it, and what does their process look like? Because all of this will help me understand, what's happening for them as we work together. And
Hey, Jessie.
Yeah.
Can I chime in with a question? So I'm wondering if I'm the only person, like as we go through this piece specifically, it's striking me how often I will explicitly have these conversations with people who are partners to the project or impacted by the change, but not necessarily within the project team itself. Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm curious, like if folks find that it's not always clear and we don't always take the time to have those conversations within the project team because we're so externally focused. Is that just me? Leah, you and I.
No, I think, that's the first thing I think of. That's why I emphasize thinking about those roles is really that you have to have good communication within your team in order to have good communications outside of it. And you really have to understand the different roles that folks play. And, coming into a team and not taking this time to get to know folks and understand how you can best work with them and what your roles and responsibilities are, which we'll talk about in a moment. It doesn't serve you, it doesn't serve the project, and it makes it harder to achieve those kind of shared outcomes that you're trying to have happen.
I love that. And ironically, if we don't do that internally, we're modeling something different than what we're asking those impacted by the change to then embody. I love that. Okay.
People can tell. I don't know if you've ever talked to, as you move out from your project team and start talking to your other partners in the agency, those people that are impacted, and you start talking to them about the project, you can tell as you talk to them that they can tell what the culture is like on your team if it's not good. that becomes apparent pretty quickly.
Love it. You have a lot of excellent feedback in the chat. Icebreakers, requesting what people's communication style. Ooh, that'd be hugely beneficial. Active listening from the get-go. Love it. Be transparent about your approach. Know what to expect and be flexible because you're collaborating. I love that.
Yeah. Everything helps. Everything you can do, every bit of time you can put towards this is really important. And I know that, again, we don't always have the luxury of all this time at the beginning of the work. So we can't always put it in, but you can fit it in wherever you can fit it in. It's really never too late to do any of this work until you're done with the project.
Love it.
Yes, report, elevator speech, good icebreaker, agree. Another thing I like to consider too is the environment that we're working in as we're talking about our strategy, and how does that impact it? Like, again, what is the project culture like, and how is it going to impact our partnership? Are they going to be supportive of us? Are they going to be inclusive? So we'll talk a bit more about that as well. And then I also like to talk specifically about what does our partnership success look like? So meaning, how do we know there's trust and respect between us as we work together? So what are we going to do to demonstrate this to each other? as well as what does our collaborative success look like? So how are we going to know that our joint efforts are going to result in the outcomes that meet both of our needs? And what does that look like for us? So I think those first three things are really important for me to talk about with someone, just to kind of kick it off and start at a big picture level. Issues and problems that people are encountering. Absolutely. I know that sometimes folks like to focus just on the positive, but I really think it's important as well to take a problem-centered approach and look at the negative sides of things as well. What's not working, right? What are the things that are standing in our way right now? Get it all out on the table. I think it's important to have equal space for positives and negatives, because that's life, right? All right, well, next slide, please. So I think this will align a lot with probably what's going on in the chat here too. And I want to talk a bit about, so once you broach the partnership, now how do you dig a bit deeper and set expectations? And this is where the rubber really, really hits the road for me. This is probably the most important piece of the work. The first thing to do, in my opinion, is go over your shared goals. Why are you partnering? We don't, I'm not going to say never, but we don't think about this enough. We don't think about the advantages of coming together and working together enough, especially if our organization is kind of siloed. So I encourage you to think about, what does it look like for you? What's your WIFM in this case? So perhaps you're providing more access by being partners to each other's resources and expertise. Perhaps you have different audiences that you can get in front of, or networks. Perhaps just together you're improving decision-making and risk management because you're sharing information, or you're able to share more information with the team. Maybe you're reducing conflict because you're involving more people in the development of things. And one of my favorites is increasing your agility and nimbleness, because partners can adapt to each other and then begin to represent each other's interests. So there's nothing more wonderful, in my opinion, than being on a project and having a partner that can fill in for you, can jump in for you, can catch you up where you might not have known, something was happening, who's kind of always has your back. To me, that's one of the biggest benefits of partnership. And then if you think about some of those pain points, for example, that one about key communicators hesitant to deliver, perhaps you can leverage each other's relationships within your organization to help those folks get on board. So that's always something to think about. And all of this and more all of these reasons can be why you're coming together, but it's just really important to explore your why and really take time to do that. Agreeing on the mission, absolutely. You have to have that before you share your goals sometimes. So I would put that in here too, for sure. The next thing I like to talk about is desired outcomes. So how do we make our shared goals concrete? It's important to really, write this stuff down, document it, and figure out, are you coming together? Perhaps sometimes you have a communication person who's with you for just a moment or a period of time or distinct efforts. And so perhaps you're just trying to keep people informed or create awareness. It's important to be really explicit about what you are hoping to do together. Maybe you are building long-term trust on the project. Maybe you are trying to reduce assumptions or confusion, or maybe you're motivating engagement together. The possibilities, again, are really endless. And then what I love to talk about and really love to write down and be very explicit about, and we'll share a tool with you at the end of this for this as well, is roles and responsibilities. So I think there's 3 different ways to look at roles and responsibilities that are really important. The first one is, what do we think our roles and responsibilities are? So that's us individually, that's us as partners. I like to walk through the activities of a project. What do we expect to do? And talk about what we think each of our roles will be in each of those activities. Get really specific about it. And then talk about, what do others think? So it's important to know what other people expect of us, because their clarity about our roles and responsibilities are going to inform how they interact with us and how they involve us in the work. So I don't know how many of you have had the same experience as me, where you may be expected to be involved in something and you weren't, or vice versa. And that's all a reflection of what other people think your roles and responsibilities are. So if you can get clear on them, you can help other people be clear on them as well, and the involvement and communication gets better. And then this, how are we actually doing it? This is a important self-check, I think, throughout the entire project. So you have your understandings and your expectations. It's important to make sure that your behaviors are truly aligning with those things. So keep an eye on that throughout. And then we're talking about timelines. So what does our mutual path forward look like? It's so important to make sure that you both have, you and your partner, maybe you and your entire team, of course, have a shared understanding of the sequence of events ahead of you. If you don't, you're going to end up, again, not working well together. And then strategies. Where do we work together? Where do we work independently? Again, you've been working independent of each other to this point. Now you're working together. It's really important to talk about those activities again. Are you going to, co-develop something? Are you going to take the first part and your partner will take the second half? Are you going to do it entirely? Those are really important things to discuss as well. And then again, like thinking about those pain points, if you can think about how creating clarity around these different areas on the slide here could really help someone know what OCM does. What the heck is OCM anyways? Well, it's these things in these activities. Or if you might feel like comms processes are burdensome, or you don't have a good commitment from communications, this is the time to kind of hash all that out and really talk about it, and make sure that you know where your partner's coming from the get-go. It makes it a lot easier as you get into the work. And I see a question from Shannon here in the chat. I'm curious where you all do an interview. Someone has a resistant partner.
That was me, Jesse.
Oh, was that you? Oh,
I'm curious. Yeah.
Right.
I want to know what people do in that moment. You too, Jesse. So, because I've run into that, like where I've tried to have the conversation and you can tell that the person's like,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And definitely something that's happened to me before. And I think, I try to really make space to understand why they might be resistant. Sometimes I talk to other folks who I know who might know these folks and get a feel for what it is that they may know is going on for them, right? What they might be struggling with. A lot of times people have history with the work. People may have history with the teams. People may have, personal things going on. You dig into the point that you feel like you can have a conversation with empathy with that person. And I consistently try to check in with them and give them space. It's kind of a balance, and you have to feel out each individual. Yeah, it can definitely be a trust issue. And the position, absolutely. There's so many different possibilities, really, in terms of why someone isn't working with you. So I encourage you not to give up, give them space, take some time to do your own research and really reflect what could be going on in the environment, in the project, in the work that might create some hesitation for them, and approach them with some understanding. Give them time to talk to you. And that really does lead to trust. For me, if you can't tell, it's the most important thing here. It's the foundation of a partnership. It really has an impact on all aspects of your relationship. It influences whether and how we will interact or not interact with each other. So you really have to build it. And then when you have it, when it gets rough or we make mistakes, the partnership gives you this wonderful grace, and everyone is lifted up as you move through that work. So I'm curious, I'm sure there's a ton in chat here. Are there other expectations anyone likes to set during this stage of developing a partnership? Are you seeing anything, Samantha, that we might want to call out?
One thing that we've encountered at L&I is, so we're lucky enough to have a comms team, which Tiffany is on, to help support some of the work that we're doing. And I'm looking to see if we have it explicitly called out. I think actually defining visually and in writing the processes that we're going to follow across the timeline. So we have, for example, like monthly learning opportunities that we're launching. And we're documenting the exact like 3-week process leading up to that. How are we going to advertise those? Who's reviewing what document? Like having that super explicit and knowing when to kick off those processes and follow it is so helpful. So the documentation piece is not always my favorite. That's why I love BAs as well, Gretchen. So it's not my favorite thing to do, but it's crucial when it comes to saying, did I hear you correctly that this is how we need to engage with one another? And then we're going to follow this together and test it out and adjust it as we go. So I think process documentation can go a long way too.
Visuals are huge. Anything you can do to help someone see something that you're talking about is really helpful. I think, like I saw in the chat, business analysts can be really helpful. Communications can be really helpful in developing visuals. And you just have to take each opportunity to try and understand that person individually. Again, they're going through something, some process of change or development. And it's important to, again, balance their needs and your needs in the space of the project. Next slide, please. And we'll talk more about this. So I wanted to share just a few lessons learned in terms of what helps and harms partnerships from my perspective. And speaking of someone who may not be willing to partner with you, oftentimes, perhaps you've been engaged with them in another situation and you've maybe strongly defended your viewpoints. I think we're all really guilty of that. I'm so guilty of that. I think a natural defensive nature, perhaps. But once you have established an overall sense of shared commitment to the work and a partnership, a shared goal, if you do that first, you can then have a really healthy dialogue about where you may be having diverging interests or views. And you can get through that in a much more comfortable and productive way. The other is limited or no expectations set for team collaboration. So I ask you all, what is the culture in your organization? What is the culture in your project? If your project team, your project manager, your sponsor, or your organizational leaders aren't vocally supporting collaboration and modeling the way, as a change manager, I think that's our responsibility to coach them in that direction because it helps make the work happen. Losing sight of the change, taking time, right? Again, we've talked about this a lot. It's an individual process. So again, this group development can apply to 2 or more people, right? We are all starting in a initial stage of work as we come together and collaborate. So it's important to address those things with a growth mindset and remember that your partnership skills and intelligence are developing as you work together. And that it's important to practice embracing those changes and working with your partners in a trustful way. And then falling prey to judgment and assumptions. So I don't know who to attribute this to, but in the absence of information, we all fill that space with our own stories, right? We've heard that before. We can all make up tons of stories. And if we're observing something and creating stories about how our partners might be showing up, it's not serving any one of us. And so it's important to talk about what trust looks and feels like, and be vulnerable, be open to feedback, and remember that trust is a belief in the probability that a person's going to behave in certain ways. So let your partner know how you plan to behave and what you hope to see from them that elicits trust from you. Next slide, please. So now it's time to do the work, test out everything that you have put in place, your strategies, your structures, your agreements, and start some regular check-ins. And I like to check in with my communications partner once a week at a minimum, sometimes twice, because it's a really, even if you don't have anything to talk about, it's a really great time to develop that relationship and get to know each other on a little bit more personal level. It can be for 10 minutes, if nothing else, but it's a, hey, we're in this together, a friendly reminder, a nice check-in, and you can even, work comes up, right? So you'll definitely get working soon if you don't have anything to talk about just yet. And then it's an opportunity, right? It's a space you always have to address issues as they come up and do it directly and do it with trust. And then as you start to hit a good stride, continue to scale your work together and sustain it, make adjustments where you need to, maybe do more or less of something. And then you can start to think about what can we do to make this partnership grow? What can we do to increase our impact, amplify our outcomes, and make all of it last? So I just want to check in the chat and see if there's any other comments that anyone is sharing here with us that we want to call out about this initial stage of building relationships. And also, I hope it feels kind of familiar to you, because when I was thinking through this, I thought, building relationships is a lot like the ADKAR model. We're developing an awareness of so many things about each other and how we're going to work together. We're developing our desire, we're developing our knowledge and ability to partner, and then we're hopefully reinforcing it through check-ins and this, consistent work and trust together. So I hope it felt like that to you as well.
And Jesse, just a heads up, and we'll bring this up in the Q&A, but someone had a really excellent comment about the documentation, both visually and in writing. I've been hearing more and more that people have charter fatigue. Amen. So what suggestions are there for alternative means of documenting expectations, roles, and other crucial info? And I think I can think of a few examples, and so attendees, please be thinking as well, and we'll dig into that during the Q&A. And as a heads up, you will also have access to the slide deck. That was another question that we got.
All right, well, so that's it for my time. I'm going to transition over to my partner, Tiffany, who will share more about partnerships and communications from a communications perspective.
Thanks, Jesse. So like Jesse said, I'm going to expand more on this relationship theme and also clarifying roles and responsibilities, but kind of from the communications side of the house. So one of the first things I learned about change management years ago is that it's really about helping people have a better experience with change. Your relationships are obviously a key part of that. They're really the foundation, honestly. So take time to get to know your communications team if you haven't already. Find out how familiar they are with change management. Communications folks generally love to tell stories, so get them to tell you stories about change management efforts they've supported that have gone well, those that haven't gone well, and find out what they think might have made those projects go a little better. If they're new to change management, be prepared to give them a quick overview of the work, some of the projects you've been involved with, and what your role has been. And then you're going to want to find out what's the best way to ask for their help. Different teams have different ways of taking requests and managing their work. So, find out. You're going to want to get a sense so that you can make it easy for them to help you. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Jerry Maguire from years ago. At this point, I think it's a really old movie. But there's a famous line in there, "Help me help you." And that's what you want to do here. You want to make it easy for your communications folks to help you. So let's talk about some ways you can do that. Find out what kinds of communications they typically help with and which ones they don't. Most communication shops have work they tend to get involved with and then things that are outside their scope. And it's going to help you if you have a sense of what those things are. And then find out more about the projects they typically help with. What do their processes and timelines look like? This will be immensely helpful so you have clear expectations about what it takes to produce different kinds of communications. For example, you or other team members might be thinking a video would be a great way to get your message out. But if you need to collaborate with your communications team on that, do you have a sense of how long it takes to produce a video? There are a lot of things that happen behind the scenes that take time, just even things like making sure the video meets accessibility requirements. So learning about these things up front is going to be super helpful. And last but not least, talk about your roles and how you might collaborate. For example, maybe you can start the first draft of a message, and then your communications person can review, edit, and help finalize. This is also a good time to talk about review processes, what their typical review and approval processes look like, and who else might be part of the review process for your particular project. Let's go to the next slide. So this brings us to the communications and change management collaboration dance. I made that phrase up because personally I like to dance, and I think it's a good metaphor for what I'm talking about today. Change managers are really good at identifying stakeholders and target audiences that are involved in the change effort. Communication folks tend to be good at identifying effective messaging and strategies to reach those target audiences. So taking time to figure out what your dance looks like when you collaborate will help it be both more fun and productive. Let's go to the next slide. So let's say now you know who your communications folks are, you've established relationships with them and know how to work with them. If you think your project needs a communications plan, try to talk to one of your communications consultants. Communications plans come in all shapes and sizes, and these folks can help create one for you. You can help by starting to think through and discuss some of the elements that go into a lot of communication plans. These include things like your objectives. You know, what are you trying to accomplish with your communications effort? Your audience. Who specifically are you trying to reach? You're going to want to identify and prioritize your audiences. And then what about the key messages? These are going to be the key things that people need to know. In general, we want to limit those to 3 to 5 messages. So that those are things that people can actually remember and either engage with or act on. Next slide. So then we kind of get down to brass tacks with what types of communications will actually help you reach your objective. What's the best order and timing of these activities? Who needs to be involved in developing, reviewing, and approving these products? Identifying your challenges and risks to success. This is really important. As I think it's even come up here a little while ago, just your resources and timelines, right, might be some of your key challenges and risks. Identifying those up front and then identifying ways to mitigate those risks are going to help you overcome those. And then finally, how are you going to measure success? You know, you're going to want to identify things that are actually measurable and probably talk about who you might want to share that with, who's going to be interested in knowing that you were successful. Sometimes that can actually be part of your communication effort, right? In the end is reporting out on those outcomes. So another thing to remember here is that a communications plan is also a communication tool. So as you're working with a communication consultant on this, think about who might benefit from knowing about it, reviewing it, or providing input. And that's what I have for you today. I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Samantha. I'm looking at the clock here and thinking we could probably go much longer than an hour, but I know we're under the clock. So
Tiffany, thank you so much. We have amazing questions that are popping up as you've been talking, and we're trying to document them all. Next slide, just as a heads up, we're going to offer you some resources in addition to the PowerPoint. So Jessie pulled together an L&I roles and responsibilities matrix, which is an awesome way to help you have the conversation with people who is doing what in this engagement and filling that out. I shared a Librem OCM Help Lab PowerPoint and recording. So a couple of years ago, we offered a free help lab on communication, effective communication, and actually pulled in a case study of a change effort at Department of Licensing and talked with them about the pain points that they were experiencing and talked about different approaches. And then Tiffany pulled together an awesome document, the L&I communications tips, which includes a matrix that you can use, a log, to really help lay out what's being communicated to whom, how are we talking about it, what are the major points that you need to to include in that. So those tools are available along with the PowerPoint. And we have so many questions that I want to dig into. Okay, so maybe let's take the charter fatigue first. So the question was around people experiencing charter fatigue. Are there other ways to really document the roles, what we're trying to accomplish, major timeline, things like that that are typically involved in the charter? What are your thoughts, Tiffany and Jesse, and anybody who wants to contribute in chat? What have you used in place of a charter?
Well, I have to say, it depends again on the effort. We're talking about, there's a lot of variables here. Some efforts just require a charter, but I think you have other resources, right? Hopefully you have a project schedule of some sort or a timeline that you can refer to. And you can use something like that in company with a roles and responsibilities matrix to really hash out what it is that what are the activities that have to happen and who is going to do them? Who are you going to involve, and think through the kind of people aspect of it. That's better than nothing, and often better than what we do in a lot of cases. Because when the charter's developed, it developed early on in the effort, and you don't always know what's going on, unfortunately. Streamline your charter. Also, I would just say we put way too much in a charter most of the times. Like, what does your charter really need to have? There are plenty of one-page charters that get you kicked off, and then you can move into the more specific planning activities.
I love that, Jesse. Another tool that I've used, especially for projects that are growing over time. So WACARES is a great example. It crosses like 3 partner agencies. And there's constantly new folks being added to the project team developing that program. So in instances like that, I've found it helpful to create actual visuals that show you like the world of the project team. You can see who sits on what team, what is the description of that particular work group, what are their main goals that they're trying to accomplish, and how do they feed into the larger picture. Very visual. So Canva, like, I should just be sponsored by Canva at this point. But I love that as a tool for people to see, like, within the holistic world here, where do I fit in? Who's doing what? That can be a great visual to help people understand their place within like the ecosystem of the change. So that's another option.
I think I would also say too, if folks are having charter fatigue, there's maybe too much emphasis on a charter and too much time being taken on the charter and not enough time doing the actual work. So I would take a look at what has you stuck in that phase of the work, versus do you need one or not?
Yeah, I'll just chime in to say the same thing can happen with a communications plan. If people kind of make it all about that, and then it becomes bigger than life or bigger than it needs to be, and you can kind of get hung up or stuck there, especially if you don't have all of the pieces complete before you need to start moving forward, right? But it's intended to be a kind of roadmap, and it doesn't have to be perfect or fully complete, right? Or even be huge. So Jesse, you talking about something, maybe you only need a 1-page roadmap and not something that's 10 pages and impossible to get done.
And Tiffany, you're kind of tagging on to another question that we had around the comms plan, like the belief that it needs to be fluid. And I could not align with that more, that comms is going to shift day to day depending on how people are showing up, what's happening in the world, like what's the current temperature and what do people need to hear and understand in this moment. For me, the communications really is catching my activity behind me as I'm trying to do things in the moment. So the comms plan itself is outlining more of like the impacted groups, to what degree, what are our beliefs around communication, and what different processes and mechanisms are we going to use. Like this is what we believe and value about communication. The matrix or the log, like you'll see from Tiffany, is capturing the actual communication that's gone out. So it serves as a really nice reference and a history of what outreach you've done and when. Any other thoughts on that?
I just want to acknowledge Gretchen in the chat that says she's a comms person and recently decided to go with a more simple communications plan format so people can scan more easily. That sounds really smart to me, because I think we can all overestimate the level of interest or time somebody's going to have to actually read our plan, right?
Yeah.
So most everyone is really, really busy every day, scanning emails, scanning. I mean, that's really how people move through a lot of their work. And so to remember to make it easy, both in format and content, for somebody to scan, get the general idea of what you're trying to accomplish, by when, who's involved, as simple as possible, is really going to help the folks that need to be either reviewing or buying into it to understand and support what it is you're trying to do.
Beautifully said. Don't make it overcomplicated, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I'd encourage you, I see a note from Darlene about charters being helpful to kind of outline the work that needs to be done. And you're right, Darlene, they definitely are. And there's other tools along the way of a project process that your project manager should have, like your schedule, and work breakdowns, various types of tools that you should be kind of consistently reviewing once the charter's done to help keep people aligned on the work that has to be done. Great, you have those tools. So I would just say, those are the tools I like to rely on more, because the charter often gets shelved. And then I would also say, again, expand your audience when you're developing these things, because the more that you discuss them with folks as they're in the making, the more clarity people have and they stay on track.
Love it. Next question. What about comms platforms other than emails or kind of out of date SharePoint? It seems like typically, like on projects especially, we might be email heavy or say reference the SharePoint. So my thoughts on that, I know this sounds old school and I'm okay with it, but interesting, engaging, and funny newsletters go a long way. So taking like the artifacts you have from the project, the schedule, for example, and pulling up the highlights and putting really simply a visual in there to say, here's where we are right now, and this is what's coming up. Doing competitions within the organization that they can participate in is helpful. Videos, like spice it up, right? Tiffany, I especially want to know, like, what do you use other than the email and SharePoint?
Yeah, and it really, this is where, going back to thinking about your audience, where are they and where can you get messages in front of them in the most effective way, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. And it's, and if you're talking about internal, the way people take information in day to day is different in different areas of your organization. So if you're trying to reach a certain subset of an audience within your organization, you've got to know, where are they located? How are they taking in information? Maybe talking, even if you're not sure, talking to managers in those areas and find out, what their culture is. And is email going to be a good tool, or do they have, stand-up meetings or other in-person or hybrid meetings where people engage a little bit more, and you can get your messages out those ways. You really just have to find out more about your audience and how you can reach them, and then leverage those tools.
Love
I'd
that.
love to
Okay, I'm going to
throw
drive.
in one more thing too. If you can
Yeah.
build a communication network with your employees, that is a fantastic way to share information and get people talking and engaged.
That's huge. There's a really phenomenal one at LNI called Link. Maybe we can offer a little bit more information about that and how it's structured after the presentation, because I've not seen anything like it in the organizations that I've supported. Last question in like 30 seconds. There were two around like what happens if people are totally resistant, and then let's talk more about external, when employees just are not interested in engaging. What about those barriers? In those moments, to me, human behavior, you need to figure out what they're scared of losing. So is it expertise, consistency, a feeling of safety that they understand the current system? Like, what is it about that human that is feeling fearful in that moment? Dig into that, and then recruit leadership and support them to be helpful in supporting people to recognize they do have a successful future in the new state that you're driving to. Any other comments, Jesse, Tiffany? When people are freaked out?
super resistance is generally more than just about the work. So have empathy for those folks and give them some time, and perhaps they just need someone to listen.
Amen.
Well said.
I just wanted to say thank you all very much. This has been a truly excellent presentation. I've learned a lot. I really loved watching the participants engage with you all. So thank you all very much. And with that, let's close this out. Have a
Awesome.
wonderful day.
Thanks so much, everybody. This was
Thank
so fun.
you.
And we'll share more resources, okay? More to come.
Thank you.